Good evening, everybody. Let's get a red book. Turn to page number 95, and let's all stand. Page 95 in the red book. Kneel at the cross. Christ will meet you there. Come while he waits for you. Listen to his voice. Leave with him your care. And begin life anew. Kneel at the cross. Leave every care. Kneel at the cross. Jesus will meet you there. Kneel at the cross. There is room for all who would his glory share. Place there and wait. Hearken there before those who are anchored there. Kneel at the cross. Leave every care. Kneel at the cross. Jesus will meet you there. Kneel at the cross. Give your idols up. Look not to realms above. Turn not away to like sparkling cup. Trust only in his love. Kneel at the cross. Leave every care. Kneel at the cross. Jesus will meet you there. Brother Jim, please some prayer, please.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we just pray for this time to meet in your house and hear your word, fellowship, and pray that you be with everyone, protect everyone from the storm, just be with those who are lost. They come to know and put their trust and faith in you for the everlasting too late. Just pray you be with those who are sick, comfort them and heal them. Lord, and just guide and direct us, help us be a light to others. Just be with our country. We praise you for all the veterans and just bring the message that you have us here tonight. Just Brother Rodney, just pray all the glory and honor goes to you and your will and everything we do. In Jesus' name,
Amen. Y'all may be seated. Let's turn to page number 256. Page 256. I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's table land.
feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost high and catch a gleam of glory bright. But still I pray, till heaven I found. Lord, plant me onto higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand. By faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground.
Any prayer requests tonight?
My grandfather fell again, I believe it was yesterday, so it's good. Pray for him.
Yes, sir. Remember this. Miss Mandy?
I have 3 unspoken, and Brother Phil Chisholm had a really rough day today, and he's hurting pretty bad on his leg, so they stay with him tonight.
Remember these. Any others? Miss Leslie? Yes, ma'am. Remember this. Miss Charlotte?
My friend that I asked prayer for, Mike, he passed away Sunday. He had pancreatic cancer. So just keep his family in your prayers. And Lloyd needs prayers because he came in today and doesn't look really good. So just keep him in your prayers.
Yes, ma'am. Remember this. Miss Amanda?
I have 2 unspoken, and then I have one. A little boy, he was 4 years old. His name was Cheston Stone. He passed away Saturday, so we can remember the family.
Yes, ma'am. Remember his family.
Remember the Hughes also, Ken Hughes' dad passed away Monday morning.
Remember Brother Hughes. Any others? Ms. Bobby?
A staff member at the school where I work at just found out she has cancer, and she has a 2-month-old and 2 other small children. So please do pray for her and for them.
Yes, ma'am. Remember this. Any others? Brother Ford?
Pray for me. Well, pray for family. But I went to the doctor Monday, and they had to go on getting diet. Whatever you say, diet. Anyway, take me off some medicines that might help. Just pray that it might. If they don't have, I have to go on kidney dialysis probably the rest of my life. So, I mean, if I have to, I will.
Remember this. Any other requests tonight? If not, Brother Morgan, can you say prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, we would all like to come before you tonight and pray, dear Lord, just to thank you for the wonderful day that we've all been able to have, dear Lord. Just thank you for keeping us all safe out on the roads and everything. We just thank you for the opportunity to be able to be together here in your house, to be able to worship you and learn about you and your word, dear Lord. We just ask that you could be with all the many, many that were brought up just now, dear Lord, and all these different prayer requests, that you could just be a comfort to all the many individuals involved, dear Lord, especially those that have lost loved ones here recently, dear Lord, that are going through some pretty rough times, whether it be with finances or medical issues or whatnot. If you could just have your will done through each and every one of these, dear Lord. We just ask that you could be with the pastor, that you could just give him the words you would have us to hear, dear Lord, and open our hearts and our minds to receive them, and just allow us to be able to take something that we can use to improve our lives for you and your work, dear Lord. Again, we thank you for everything you do for us. We pray for these in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. Let's turn to page 174. Page 174. Oh, they tell me of a home far beyond the skies. Oh, they tell me of a home far away. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, tell me of a home where my friends have gone. Oh, they tell me of that land far away, where the tree of life in eternal bloom sheds its fragrance through the unclouded day. Oh, the land of boundless day. Oh, the land of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me of a king in his beauty there. And they tell me that my eyes shall behold, where he sits on the throne that is whiter than snow, in that city that is made of gold. Oh, the land of boundless day. Oh, the land of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me that he smiles on his children there, and his smile drives their sorrows all away. And they tell me that no tears ever come again in that lovely land of unclouded day. Oh, the land of cloudless day. Oh, the land of an unclouded day. Oh, they tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. Any specials tonight?
This one's called Under His Feet. When Simon Peter walked abreast, putting his faith unto the test, he said, Master, wilt thou bidst me come unto thee? Jesus said, Come, so Peter went, and when the faith he had was spent, Peter sank low, but Jesus had waves roll under his feet. Under his feet, under his feet. There's not a problem that you'll face he cannot meet. Whenever you've waded out too far in waters too deep, remember when waves are over his head, they're under his feet. Oft times we face in trials sore, can't face our problems anymore, forgetting wherever we may go, he's been there before. We should look up and praise the Lord. He walks the waters and the shores. The heavenly breeze and the thundering seas are under his feet. Under his feet. Under his feet. There's not a problem that you'll face he cannot meet. Whenever you've waded out too far in waters too deep, remember when waves are over your head, they're under his feet.
Amen. Any others tonight?
Well, the storms are raging. The winds are blowing. But God is still on the throne. Sickness on every hand. Prayer request indicated that there was several families right now that are grieving. We certainly want to pray and lift them up before the Lord. Sometimes it's expected, but death is still a separation that hurts. And so we pray one for another. I've said it before, I'll say it again, that in every age, we need the church. But especially whenever we see the world going in such an awful direction as it's going, we need the church. We need that sanctuary. That place where we can come to and put aside the things of the world for a little while and put away the cares of the world and come together with people of like-minded, like faith and worship the Lord and sing praises unto His name and study His Word, and the Spirit of God moves during that time and moves into our heart to give us courage whenever we're weak. You know, we face things that we're not sure how we're going to face them. All of us do that. And we're going into these and we know we got to face them. We can't get out of it. And so we plead with the Lord for strength and courage and discernment, understanding. And we study the Word of God. Coming to the house of God is one of those things that helps us to put things in perspective, that we get out of perspective when we stay away. Many times we will get things out of perspective whenever we are not around God's people. But when we come and we hear the testimonies one with another, and we hear the joys, we share with one another things we've learned in the Scriptures. I mean, isn't it interesting when we find something in the Scriptures that we've never seen before, and we share it with somebody else, and maybe they've seen it, but the enthusiasm that we have when we're sharing it, it's infectious, and this is how God designed the church. Well, we're going to continue in our study for the church covenant. We've come to the place that seems to be a controversial subject anymore, but it didn't used to be that way. In the early days of the church, it seemed like that most people agreed with abstaining from alcohol. But now it seems like that it is being accepted in the churches, and as long as we don't go overboard with it. I was reading after a fellow, and he said using alcohol or socialized drinking in moderation is kind of like lying a little bit, or adultery in moderation. And I was like, well, I'm not sure that you put them all in the category, but he did. He put them in that category, and I was thinking, that alcohol was illegal in the United States for a long time. One man said it like this, said alcohol was only illegal in the United States until they figured out how to tax it. Well, now there are 2 states in our union that have, I don't know whether they passed it, I think they passed it, to lessen the penalty or decriminalize hard drugs. They've already decriminalized marijuana in most places, and matters how much you've got of it. I guess if you're hauling bales of it, you probably still get in trouble. But if you've just got your little bag of it or what they do, and all, they just kind of there's no penalty to it anymore. But now they've reached another point, and I heard a man say this many years ago. He said that marijuana was actually an introduction drug. It was an introduction to other drugs. And whenever we seen the bill, and I think it was Brother Chisholm that made a comment about this early on, whenever they was talking about to legalize marijuana for medical use, he said, and I think it was him. If it wasn't, then I'll take the blame for it. But that their agenda is not just for medical purposes. That their agenda is to get that passed, and then it'll be easier to get it passed for recreational. And what have they done? And now they're legalizing, if you will, they might as well say they're legalizing hard drugs. And I haven't seen the list of what they call hard drugs, but I'm assuming that they're talking about things like cocaine and drugs like that. And I'm thinking to myself, how stupid can we get? I mean, whenever alcohol came out and people were able to go and buy liquor, then it became one of those things that they would take that liquor and then they would get into a $2,000 or back then probably a $2,000 or $3,000 or pound vehicle and drive down the road at 50 miles an hour and run into somebody because their senses are messed up. Now, we're going to be looking at a few things about alcohol in particular, but I want to include in this, it doesn't say it. There are some newer updated church covenants that in here in this category, they actually include drugs and pornography. I think it's pretty obvious that we ought to abstain from them too, right? But in this particular one, talking about alcohol, and we go to the scriptures and we find in Proverbs chapter number 20. Proverbs chapter number 20. A verse that I learned a long time ago that helps us to get a perspective of what the Bible says about alcohol. He said, wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. I mean, that's pretty plain, isn't it? That he said that wine is a mocker, and strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. When we go through these scriptures, and we're going to be looking at several places in the scriptures today, that where the words mocker, deceiver, destroyer, these things are the effects that this brings on us. And I can attest to you that I have seen many families that have been destroyed over alcoholism. There's been a man that has forsaken his family, have taken the last bit of their money and went and bought alcohol rather than take care of their family. As a matter of fact, we've got a great preacher that testified of that in our history. I can't remember whether it was D.L. Moody saying it about another man or another man saying it about D.L. Moody, but that what happened was that he was an alcoholic. This man was an alcoholic, and that his 2-year-old girl had died. And they had dressed her up and put her in a casket and all, and he's standing over the casket trying to figure out how he's going to get another dime or whatever it costs to go and get another thing of liquor. And he reaches down and he takes the little shoes off of his 2-year-old daughter laying in a casket and hides them, takes them out, sells them so he can get some more alcohol. This is now a preacher that he looked back on that and seen how horrible it was. But that's what the alcohol had driven him to. Drugs have driven people to kill their own parents or steal from their own parents and loved ones, and it drives them to do that without addiction. And they have that, and they cannot stay away from that. Those are what we would call extreme cases, because we want to try to say, well, not everybody is addicted to the drugs. They just socially use it. Now, we're going to address that as well, but we're going to take it slow. Isn't that what we do in moderation? We don't drink it fast, we drink it slow. Say, no, that's not what moderation is. The Bible tells us that this liquor, this hard drink or strong drink. Some people say, well, you got wine, and then you got strong drink and so forth like that. So you got the whiskeys and the bourbons and the things like that. And I done an extensive study many years ago on the words that are used in the Hebrew and Greek, and they are translated wine. And there's several different variations of that, and some of these words that go back to this are translated vinegar. Some of them are translated strong drink, and so forth. So you have all these different ones that are translated, and these are the different variations of the alcohol and the fermenting process and so forth. And if you go back in the Bible, you'll find that there's not many places there where they had the alcohol content that they do today. Very seldom did you find anywhere where they had the alcohol content that they've got today. Even in beer was stronger than some of their strong drink that they would have had back then with the alcohol content, which is the mind-altering agent. that changes our reflexes and changes our the way that our judgment calls and things like that. Whenever we're driving down the road and so forth. And I don't know. I've never had a problem with alcohol. Thank the Lord. I'm glad. Glad the Lord saved me early, so I never had a problem with alcoholism or anything. But I've seen people who do. As a matter of fact, I went to school with a boy that by the time that he was, I think he was only 17 years old, whenever he died of alcohol poisoning because he drank every minute of the day. And I thought how sad that is that we would be given over to something that would take over our lives like that. But it happens, and we've got to be cautious of that. But also, let me say, there's a lot of people that, I'm going to use this illustration. You're going to think it's strange, but I hope it'll make sense to you in the end. That there are people that like to walk on the line of tragedy. I mean, they're thrill seekers. People that are thrill seekers, and they want to run right on the edge of there, and they think, boy, we cheated death this time. And the Bible talks about those ones who have made that covenant with death and so forth. Isaiah, I believe it was, teaching or talking to the children of Israel, and speaking about that they made this covenant. He said, listen, that covenant it ain't going to work. It ain't going to last. You're going to fall one day. But here's the illustration I wanted to bring out. There are people that love snakes. And they will get these snakes, and they have them in their homes and so forth like that. And some of them have a poisonous bite to them, but most of the people are going with the ones that don't have a poisonous bite, but they're constrictors. And they get these pythons, boa constrictors, whatever they are, and they get them, bring them in their homes. And there was a lady up in Lake County, or a family up in Lake County, if you'll remember this just a few years ago, up in Lake County, and they had this snake in their home, and they had a 2-year-old toddler. And this snake ended up getting out, and all as they would bring them snakes out, put them all over their necks and around the children and sleep with them, and they had kind of put it on social media like that. Well, what happened was that snake did what snakes do, and it found that toddler, it wrapped around her, and it constricted her, and it killed her. Eventually, what they did was, I don't know whether whether her and him are still facing these charges or what, but they charged them with neglect and child abuse because they brought the snake into the home and they neglected to secure the snake so that the snake would not grab a hold of this child and kill this child. I tell you today that we will have a responsibility, as the book of Habakkuk, if you wanted to write this down, let me see where it's at. It's in Habakkuk chapter number 2. Habakkuk. That's how it's spelled, Habakkuk. Chapter number 2, verse 15 over there. And it says, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Now, it's dealing with a little bit of different thing there, but speaking about the nakedness, but when we engage in getting other people to drink alcohol, and we do that, whether it's in the sale of it or whatever, when we do that, what we're doing is we're putting ourselves out there as the responsible party. And I know there's a lot of debate, and years ago they used to have churches. I remember churches that used to have a problem with whenever the kids when Publix began to first sell wine. They didn't always sell that alcohol, by the way. But when they first began to sell that wine, I remember sometime some of the older people talking about how that now they had to address the fact that a lot of our children, whenever they would get into work program, they would go to work for Publix, and now our children had to stand there and cash out these people who were buying alcohol. and yet they would never work at a bar or anything like that. And it put them in, put people, and it put the church, it even put individuals. Sometimes early on, the individuals, the young people or whoever it was working there, would not even do it. They refused to do it, and they made provisions for them not to have to do that early on. But as time goes on, what happens is that it becomes accepted. And we become desensitized to it. As a matter of fact, I remember whenever I first entered to preach that there were several pastors who refused to go to certain restaurants because they actually offered alcohol. And now I'm thinking, man, that pretty well limits you on where you can go now, doesn't it? But what we have to do is we have to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, and we have to have some discernment and understanding about these things. It's still wrong, and as a church covenant, as a church, we certainly cannot offer alcohol at our church gatherings. Although there are a lot of churches today that are doing that very thing. That whenever they gather together, matter of fact, one lady told me one time, whenever we had several discussions about this, she wasn't a member of the church, but had been. But anyway, we had discussed this several times, and she made a comment, and she said, I think it's a fantastic thing to where we can be out at a church gathering, at a bonfire, church gathering, and I can have my drink and enjoy that, and we can be talking about the things of God. I said, that is hypocrisy, and that is blatantly shaking your fist in the face of God and telling Him, hey, we don't care what you said in your word. You got to deny so many scriptures. You got to ignore so many scriptures in order to be able to do that. And many people, their conscience is seared as with a hot iron. In the church covenant, in case you did not read that part, it says to abstain from the sale and use of intoxicating drinks as a beverage. They identified it as a beverage here. And the reason they identified it as a beverage is because alcohol has been used in medicine and still is today. Matter of fact, the best stuff I can take for whenever I get, one of them big old colds, and you just can't get over it, and you can't get no rest at night, you lay down and you got that tickle go down and you cough and you hack and you sneeze and all that. And boy, I go up there and I look for me some real sure enough alcohol. You say, preacher, do you go by? Yeah, in the form of NyQuil. But there was home remedy things that were usually made, and one of the main ingredients was a very strong alcohol to be put in that for cough medicines. And I hear people joking about it all the time, saying, I got a little bit of wine for my stomach's sake, or I take a little bit of which is what Paul told young Timothy to do, and you look at that word in the translation and you go back and you identify and see what it was and so forth like that and investigate it. But anyway, when we're talking about the alcohol, the problem is that there's an enticement to the alcohol that brings them to a place to where that their senses are, their sharp edges of conviction are dulled a little bit, and they think that that's the way that they can relax and enjoy themselves. I'm asking this question: why can't we relax in the promises of God and enjoy ourselves in a pure and a Christian atmosphere? There's a spiritual problem if we've got to have alcohol to do it. It's just plain and simple to me. Go to Proverbs 31. Proverbs chapter 31. The words of King Samuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him. What, my son? And what, the son of my womb? And what, the son of my vows? Give not thy strength unto women. That's a good advice for you boys. nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish. Did y'all hear that? Give strong drink to him that is ready to perish, and wine unto those that be of heavy hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Open thy mouth for the dumb in the cause of all such as are appointed to destruction. I went one verse too far. But in this, he said, listen, there is reasons in medicinal purposes whenever somebody is aged and they were laying on their deathbed, or y'all seen the Western movies, you know, where they always had a bottle of whiskey of some sort. And whenever somebody got shot and they was going to take that bullet out themselves, and they'd just drench him down with whiskey, you know, and get him good and drunk, and then go on. You know why? It was because it caused their senses not to be able to realize that they're fixing to be gouged on. That if somebody fixing to stick a knife about that long and that broad down in there, cut and dig around in there and pull it out, and to deaden that pain. And then whenever they got snake bit, they'd take and cut it. By the way, that is not the thing to do. Whenever you get snake bit, is to lance it. I found out that's one of the worst things you can do. But anyhow, they would lance it open and then they'd pour whiskey in it. I mean, that's poison on top of poison. Y'all ever rub salt in your open wound? It burns. I mean, it burns bad. Whenever I was a kid, they had this stuff, and I don't know. I guess they gave it out free for tormenting kids. I think they did. I think you went to the pharmacy and said, "Oh, my kids have been terrible. Oh, I got just the right thing for you. Here is some methylate." We called it monkey blood. And you get an open, something open. I mean, whether it's a scratch or whatever it is, and they want to try to make sure that it gets sterilized, and they break the little glass. Some of them had the thing where you break the little glass. Some of them had a jar. I mean, Mama had a little jar where you open it up and you had like a paintbrush on there. And it's like, oh man, just give me the little thing where you squeeze, and I can just dab a little bit on it. No, she'd have loaded her down. And I mean, you load it down on there, and the first thing they would do is they'd go to blow, and first they go, and they blow and blow and blow, and while they're blowing on it, you're going, ah, ah. I know y'all needed the sound effects for that. It helps. Now, when we think about the medicinal purposes for things that normally would not be something that we would enjoy at all. I mean, I don't enjoy methylate. I don't like the smell of it. I can smell it right now and start burning all over. The alcohol is being introduced and it's being advertised as something that is extremely pleasurable and that it can help you to get away from all your worries. Used as medicine whenever there is no escape, whenever the man's about to die, and you give that to him to ease his pain a little bit, and his troubles and his cares and so on. That's about the same thing as giving them morphine. Now, they've got the morphine. How many of y'all have known people that said we want to hold off from giving them morphine until that they're not able to communicate with us anymore? Because as long as they're able to communicate with us, we don't want to give them morphine so we can have that moment. That ought to be key. A bell ought to go off in our minds and say, giving it to them does alter their minds. And it blocks. Sometimes it blocks the obvious pains. and these drugs that people are on, that they're doing that. Why? It's because I think people are in a world where they're under conviction and they know what's right, but they don't want to do what's right, and they need something to help them to forget about what's right so that they can just go on, because that's what sin does, by the way. Sin desires to be uncontrolled. That's what sin desires, is not to be controlled. Not only that, there's plenty of other things that we can look into. In the book of Isaiah, chapter number 5, we can read over there about the alcohol and the problems and the lack of judgment that the princes and the prophets have had and so forth. And they even brought that in. The prophets started doing that as well. And they would start drinking and having these parties. And now, let me tell you something. If we was to go over, if we make it over to 1 Corinthians over there this evening, you'll find where that even in the communion services, they brought in the things that were not proper. They brought the wrong bread. They made a feast out of it, and then they brought in contaminated wine, and they're still doing that today. As a matter of fact, there are churches today that use a fermented wine, and matter of fact, some of the priests or some of the pastors have been guilty of taking that afterward, the leftover, and making some sort of a drunken bash out of it afterwards. And they was doing similar things in the book of Corinth, or in the church at Corinth. They were bringing in worldly things and making them part of a church. So, as a matter of fact, they even had some of them had temple prostitutes, male and female. Now, we know that that's filthy. Well, they also contaminated the very communion cup, and they contaminated that with, they'd say, well, we need unleavened. Some of the sects would say, well, we need unleavened bread over here, but yet they would use leavened wine. And some of them would just have leavened bread and leavened wine and say, well, it doesn't matter, it's just a commemorative. And the Apostle Paul wrote to Corinth and told him, said, the way that you're doing this and the treatment that you're giving it and so forth, he said, some of you are sick and some are dead. In other words, God has killed some of them. It's very interesting that we look into these things. Proverbs chapter number 23. Proverbs chapter 23. Verse number 29. He said, who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? They that tarry long at the wine. They that go to seek mixed wine. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth itself color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. And then he goes on to say what will happen to you. He said it'll cause your judgment to be real bad. Y'all hear them country music songs, you know, and they're all talking about bars and drinking and this, that, and other. And one of them come up with a very true song. And it says all the girls get better looking or prettier at closing time. That's after they've done had a lot of liquor. I mean, when they're sober, they wouldn't have dared went over there and tried to lay a kissing on them. But now that they're drunk, they start to look real good. He says in verse number 33, he said, thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. I mean, sometimes their tongue gets really loose whenever they get alcohol in them. And they say things that they wouldn't say otherwise. They get at it. And some of them get courage. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. They'll get a little crazy. You say, top of a mast, laying on top of a mast. Y'all seen drunk people do crazy things? They do. He said, they have stricken me, shalt thou say. He said, they have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. I didn't even feel it whenever I got all beat up. He said, when shall I awake? He said, I will seek it again, yet again. Y'all ever met anybody like that? I mean, they get drunk, they get beat up or whatever, and next morning they show them pictures of what they did, and they're like, I think I'll go back tonight and do that again. It completely drives away our consciousness toward God and our understanding, our direction. It is not for Christians to have alcohol. If you're sick and you need the alcohol part of it, use it as medicine and don't tarry long at it. Whenever Lori's mama was had cancer and she was going through the chemo, and back then they knew a lot for their day, but they didn't know a lot. One of the things is her blood count would be way down, which is what they do today. They check your blood count and so forth whenever you go to take the treatments. What they told her was, the doctor told her, says, what I'd like you to do is I'd like for you to drink, I think it was 8-ounce glass of red wine every night. And it's a blood builder. It'll help build your blood, and it'll help you a lot. And she said to the doctor, Doctor, I'm a Christian and I have never drank anything like that, and I don't intend to start now. What else can I do? And I think it was just pure grape juice. They told her just drink pure grape juice and it'll do the same thing. But it's a little more enticing for us to say, well, the doctor said that I need to drink a glass of wine every night. Another one told me, he said that his doctor told him, you need to take a shot of liquor every night. That'll help you sleep. I'm like, yeah. And then whenever you get to the point where that one shot don't work, then you have to have 2. And then when 2 don't work, and you still can't get no sleep, and you have to have 3. Next thing you know, you're buying a bottle every day. You say, preacher, that ain't how it works. That is how it works. Sin does not stay dormant. It's not satisfied staying dormant. Sin wants to increase. So whenever they go out to these bars and they hang out there, by the way, I heard a fellow say this one time. He said, I tell you what, I found my first wife at a bar. And he said, what about your second? At a bar. And your third? At a bar. I'm like, seems like there's a pattern here. I know it's really not comical when you look at the seriousness of it, but when you look at the stupidity of it, it's really comical. And anyway. For the people that go to a bar to drink alcohol, there'll be others that drink socially at home, and they'll say, well, we don't go to the bars. We don't go to the illicit places like that. We just drink at home. And another problem with that is that when you drink in the privacy of your home, when you're in the bar, a lot of times you've got somebody that will at least stop you at some point and say, hey, you can't do that here. At home, you may not have anybody to stop you, and many times their anger or whatever, when somebody tries, will be infuriating, and they lose control. And if they begin to abuse a child or a person, a parent or an adult, maybe an aged parent, and they don't have the cognizance to stop. Luke chapter number 21, verse number 34. Take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting, and drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come upon you unawares. It is important for us to be sober-minded. For us to be sober-minded, that the day of the Lord does not catch us off guard. That does not just take into consideration the alcohol, but that takes into consideration also the not being carried away with the cares of this life. I mean, not being caught up with that. Whenever we're talking about the church covenant, we're going to bring reproach on the church. We're going to bring reproach on ourselves. We're going to bring reproach on on God Himself. When we began to indulge ourselves in the things of this world and in drunkenness and so forth, and then the socialized drinking part is, well, I don't get drunk. I just socialize. What you're doing though is you're opening a gate. Maybe you don't do that. Maybe you just take a drink and that's it. But somebody sees you like your children and they can't do it. Here's where a big problem comes in. They can't stop. They can't just have a little and then walk away. Romans chapter 13 and verse 13 reads in part, let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness. Romans 14:21 says, it states this in it, it is good neither to eat flesh nor to drink wine, nor anything whereby thy brother stumbleth, or is offended, or is made weak. There's a list in Galatians chapter number 5 that includes drunkenness in those who will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. In Galatians chapter 5. Why in the world, if we read these scriptures, why in the world would we want to bring that and incorporate it into part of our lifestyle as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ and as the church of the living God? It makes no sense to me. I think this is very appropriate to be in the church covenant, that we would come together and covenant to abstain from it. Abstain from selling and delivering and so forth like that to the best of our ability. Abstain from that. Let me tell you, whenever a man that was working, and I'd heard this story about a man that worked for Budweiser Corporation, and he was almost at his retirement time. I mean, he was just within about 4 or 5 years of his full retirement, and for him, if he took it early, it was going to mean he was going to lose a lot of money. But he got saved. God gloriously saved him. He had been an alcoholic, but God had saved him. And the first thing he did was went back to his job, and he resigned, and he said, I cannot work here anymore. I cannot be part of doing this because it is against God, and I need to honor and glorify God. And God blessed that man, and he lived a good long life after that from the story that I heard. But the thing is that when God deals with us, He don't just deal with us partly and get us part the way. I mean, He carries us all the way. Either we're all the way saved or we're lost. I'll bring out something about an event that took place just a few days ago. That you've seen many of these events happening. And I heard the newscasters say, and this happened to be on election night. And I heard several of the news people. One of them was, I think she couldn't wait to put the microphone down. And she said that out here today that there is a lot of drinking going on, and there's going to be a lot of people drunk partying today because they are claiming the victory for President Biden, or elect, or whatever he is. And I thought about this thing. I flipped over to another channel, and there was a man there that was on the opposing side of this thing anyway, and he said, yes, he said, there are plenty of people out there, and when I looked in the crowds of every channel that I went to, the crowd's ages looked just like they was right out of universities. This is the group. The old ones, they was already at home in bed. And so, but it was that group, that middle-aged group there, and they had there was everywhere you looked, there were the gay flags flying, and they were hugging and kissing and stuff like that. And this man, he said, whatever you want to make of this, he said, I will tell you that most of the people out here do have masks on, but they are celebrating. And then they showed a clip and said, just like this is an example of what's going on throughout the whole city here. He said they are celebrating with champagne, and they popped the top on the champagne. They pulled their mask down. They drank. They handed it to the next one. He drank. Handed it to the next one. They drank. Handed it to the next one. They drank. And then they put their mask back on. I'm like, woo! This is a smart bunch of people. I mean, they got it going on. These are university graduates. Woo! Man. He said, let us walk honestly as in the day, not in drunkenness and rioting and reveling in another passage. That's not for us to do. That's not for Christians. That's no place for us to be. And let me tell you something else. If Donald Trump had been reelected, that's not no place for us to be. Not for us to run out there in the streets and act like a bunch of hoodlums. But a lot of them need a little bit of courage to do it. And many of them find it in either some sort of a drug or in alcohol, and in accompanying with those who do. And there's plenty of businesses all around that have made the statement that through this pandemic that they have lost so much money. And several of those places were bars that did not sell food, that looked into trying to sell food now. And I want to tell y'all something. I want to warn you. There's a lot of these places that have been selling food. See, what's happening now is the bars that didn't are trying to sell food so that they can get their customers back in. But years ago, what they started doing is taking a restaurant that sold food to entice families to come, and then sold alcohol and had an environment to where you could be sitting at a table with your family and still have your bar friends and drink your whatever and watch the football game or whatever. And they called them sports bars. That's no place for a Christian. Just going to be plain with you. It's no place for a child of God. Having said that, let's all stand.